All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about disruptive design today, which you know, that's why you're here. Just a quick introduction for us. I'm Gina Schaefer. I'm with Deloitte Consulting, and I've been there a very long time. And I started my career in shared services, global business services, cost transformation, and so this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I now run the intelligent automation practice for Deloitte in the US. Joe?
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So Joe Serpinaut, also part of Deloitte Consulting. I support Gina and the team in the intelligent automation practice. Been at the firm for about 3 years now. My background is actually not consulting, so I'm not a lifelong consultant. Technology, product delivery, commercial team organization, everything from AI, automation, and data. So.
All right, so hopefully this is an interactive session. Feel free to stump the band. I'll direct all hard questions to Joe, so you might as well just point them that way. Okay, so a little bit of kind of what we're going to cover today. Talk about market perspectives and what's driving the need for a new way to think about design, particularly in the realm of intelligent automation. We'll talk about how we define disruptive design, and then finally, how this is different and where others are on the journey. Okay, so first of all, Deloitte does this survey. We've been doing it for about 7 years around intelligent automation. And it's been really insightful to see how things have changed over the years. I found this data point from the most recent 2022 survey, and just you can Google the statistics. There's about 450 respondents globally, different company sizes, et cetera, et cetera. And so over the years, we've seen, so kind of hard to orient you to this chart. The blue bar is cost reduction over the years. The teal bar is revenue increase expectations, and the green bar is payback period. So we asked our survey respondents, what are you expecting from your automation programs? And so you can see a slight increase in 19 to 20, and then from 20 to 21, significant increase in expectations around cost reduction, increased revenue, and then not surprisingly, an increase in the payback period. So what does that tell us? And I would welcome conjecture from the audience and from you folks too, but kind of our thought process of what that's telling us, and consistent with what we've seen across our clients in the marketplace. Things are getting more difficult in the early stages. Organizations kind of tripped over some value, right? It was easy to find stuff. It wasn't uncommon for us to build a simple automation that would save millions, right? By the way, if that happened to you, somebody probably should get fired because they probably should have found that before they had the automation capability. But still, there was a lot of that sort of thing out there. And there's much less of that. It's getting harder, and you have to be better to get the stuff that we're looking for. So that's driving, in our thought, the increased expectations, but also the increased payback period. Welcome any thoughts from others on that concept. Right. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
From my perspective, payback period, part of that, if 2019 is, relatively speaking, a program at immaturity, and 2021 is more maturity, if you will, payback period, would that not include maintenance?
Well, you would expect in your payback calculation, you would have included the cost of maintenance. So you would think even throughout the years that'd be included. Yeah. You would think total cost of ownership to define your payback, right?
Yeah, please.
Do you think?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I forgot we're
Hey
streaming.
there. Do you think the increase in payback is reflecting an increased belief that these investments do pay off, and so there's a willingness to invest more in these larger initiatives?
I think that, yes, there's more willing to invest. I think in the early days, at least what we experienced was personally very frustrating to me because throughout my career in consulting, which has been very long, we would never walk into a client and they would say, we expect a 6-month payback period from whatever you're doing. That's just unheard of, right? And it was borderline silly at the time, and I think that there's, to your point, realization that this works, and there's willingness to take some more chances. And we'll talk a little bit about what taking more chances looks like. So yes, and I think other reasons driving that as well. Okay, next slide. So this one we like to talk about, and it sets up the kind of the concept of disruptive design quite well. This has always been the case. So this question asks our clients, what do you see as the barriers to scaling your intelligent automation program? And so in this, we show back to 2018. This has been the case since day one. I actually think of maybe lack of skills or IT readiness might have been in the early stages, right? But process fragmentation is the #1 issue. And you think about that, non-standard processes, instead of building one solution, you've got to build 15 or standardize the process. And another thing that was the case early on, and I don't know, I meant to ask you where folks are in the journey towards automation, because I think those that are early on might have some expectations that we should just kind of tweak some of these things, and if we have non-standard processes, it's okay to just kind of apply some Band-Aids. I think that was the case very early on. People were less willing because of the really high expectations, because of the hype. Folks were unwilling to say, let's look at the discipline of redesigning the process that we're working towards, and let's figure out where we can tack on some Band-Aids and save a few bucks. And that kind of worked for a while in the early stages. But I think now people realize you can have benefit from that. The total cost of ownership comes into play, to your earlier point, the cost of maintenance, things like that kind of open folks' eyes and says we really need to think differently about how we apply this capability to truly transform a business process. And so process fragmentation remains the #1 concern. That's not going away. Clients said, I want to do this fast and cheap and easy, and we don't want to sit and look at our process and think about how to do this better. We just want to slap this in. It's like, fine, we'll argue with you till a point, and then we'll just do that with you, right? So that there was a lot of that in the early days, and I think still with the handful of organizations that are on their journey today, starting their journey now, that still is the case. And so hopefully if there's anybody like that in here, you're taking some notes from those that have had experience. We can cover the other ones too. I think the interesting one, lack of a clear vision, has come up in the most recent survey. It was down in 2020. I think lack of skills to implement in 2020, lack of everything to do everything was down in 2020. I think that was kind of the point there. Resistance to change, this was very clear to us as we were working through the pandemic. Resistance for change, I don't think I have this slide in here from the survey. Again, you can Google this and get it. But the workforce became way more resistant to automation because I think during the pandemic there was a perception that we were going to replace people.
Yeah.
And that tradition, again, I'd love to, I wish we had a poll anywhere feature here, but I'd love to hear from you. Like, we traditionally don't, though most clients look to reduce FTEs. There's very rarely layoffs because of that. It's unfilled positions, it's attrition that we don't replace and things like that. And so that fear is largely unfounded. And we've seen this again from the beginning. The way these programs are communicated are challenging to the workforce. I remember, just a quick story, I remember when we first did this about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago at a client. We did it for free because we didn't know what we were doing, right? We met with the client, we brought our developers, they had just learned the capability, and they were sitting with an individual, and I think we were automating data entry and SAP around, I don't know, some data maintenance task. Somebody came into the room while we were doing the testing, and the individual that kind of did the design with us, did the work, was in the room. Somebody said, hey, what are you guys doing in there? And my developer said, we're building a robot that's going to replace Nathan's job. So that sort of perception, I think, kind of permeates a lot of these programs. And I think that got worse, at the height of the pandemic, and it's waning a little bit. Probably a lot more to uncover on this, but we need to focus on the disruptive design. Yeah.
IT readiness, we are seeing there's a slight dip in 2021 is because of the new technologies the companies are introducing, and that's where the IT is not ready to kind of move ahead with that, or still with the RPA itself where we are seeing a dip?
So you were like Ed McMahon, like setting up the next question, because I think, oh no, I'm going to go to the next slide and then back up. So yeah, so one of the things that maybe is obvious to everybody, to get bigger benefit, to drive more impactful outcomes, you've got to expand your tooling and your capabilities. We're going to talk about disruptive design, but you've got to have the tools in the toolbox to actually drive the outcomes you're promising in that disruptive design. And so, yes, and I run a consulting practice, so I essentially run an automation shop, right? I have the same challenges you do in terms of the capabilities and how do we skill people and what skills make sense in one individual, how do we make people fungible, where do we buy or where do we build, buy, or borrow skills? That continues to be a challenge. Again, that would be a whole nother 45-minute topic around how we drive the talent agenda around this. But yes, so to answer your question, expectations are going up, breadth of capabilities, more challenging tooling to some degree in terms of taking longer to implement, deploy, and driving that longer payback, but more impactful tooling. So RPA is, I'm surprised that anybody doesn't have some form of RPA today, but it still is the case. OCR, ICR, we should probably update the survey and call it IDP. Everybody has OCR, that's pretty table stakes, but IDP. BPM and process orchestration, looking at a resurgence and a convergence really in those capabilities among the vendors that have RPA tooling, and then some of the vendors that are kind of pure play BPM are pulling into the RPA space, right? So a lot of convergence there. I think the takeaway there is that concept of case management, workflow orchestration is a good one, however you kind of try to achieve that with your tooling. That one's definitely on the upswing. If I designed this survey myself, we would not have asked for low code and AI, because I don't know what the hell that means. Because that could apply to pretty much anything. Process monitoring, process mining, that's another one you've seen with Fortress IQ acquisition here, and a lot of those types of acquisitions across the industry. That's becoming more and more important, more compelling to drive what we're going to talk about, and that is data-based decisions on what we're trying to impact and automate. In the early days, even though these capabilities were available, we'd walk in, and again, with clients' expectations about quick turn, quick payback, there was not the time to sit back and think holistically about the process and the data behind it, and how to transform it. So expect to see that one on the rise.
I'm just going to make one more comment too. As you see all these different technologies start to emerge and come to the forefront as they're trying to drive more value from end-to-end process automation and leveraging these different tool sets. When we work with many of our clients, these capabilities sit across different silos and different functional areas, whether it's within IT, within a business function area. So again, to lead into what we'll talk about here of disruptive redesign, how do you harness different technologies that are owned by different groups to solve one problem for one functional area, right? An end-to-end process automation. That's becoming more difficult as well, because you can have all these capabilities, but being able to try to integrate and orchestrate them to solve a problem for one functional or one business unit actually poses a whole new set of challenges, right? So just another thing about.
Right, and again, the product management mindset that's coming into play in a lot of IT shops and a lot of automation organizations attempt to address that issue. How do we bring together the capabilities within the corporate function, the center function, whoever owns this tech within IT or business? How do we bring that together so we're bringing one package of solution to our business stakeholders rather than everybody knocking on their door with their bag of hammers saying, what can I hit with my bag of hammers? Like, let's bring capabilities to drive your solution, and that's part of that process, product design mentality. Yep. I should have not kind of skipped past AI. AI is a tough one. We think about how we incorporate machine learning in the stuff that we do. We're going to share a demo today that uses some of that in an algorithm on intelligent document ingestion or data ingestion. That's a tough one in where those skill sets lie, how you apply those skill sets, how you keep AI talent interested in what they're doing, right, and how you maintain a career path. And for that's a very challenging thing, but we know without that, the impact of this will diminish. Yes, question in the back.
In addition to these, we also have situations where, especially if you're an SAP shop and you go to S4, etc., they also bring in a huge amount of automation, etc. So there's sort of an interest to say, why do you want another third-party tool? Why do you not do some of these automations within these native platforms? Is that something which you've come across?
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of the tooling in those native platforms is somewhat nascent, right? If you look at the acquisition, you mentioned SAP. What was that thing called? Contextor. Yeah, back about 3-4 years ago. It wasn't a best-of-breed tool. I would say if SAP decided to double down on their investment in that capability, they would probably come up with something great. They haven't, right? That's not. And so in the tooling in Salesforce, ServiceNow, they tend to be more focused on their ecosystem of capability. The flexibility isn't quite there. And so depending, again, and this is the tendency of hammers looking for nails, right? And we should not be hammers looking for nails either, but looking for the best solution to solve the problem. In some cases, if it's a big SAP shop, they're going to say, we're going to jerry-rig everything and fit it into SAP. That may be okay for some of the stuff that's really around SAP, but if you have an enterprise strategy around intelligent automation, you have a suite of tools and the option to choose the best-of-breed tools. One more comment. I'm working with a large pharmaceutical client. Same question. In their product management kind of focus in their IT group, they look to say, and this is actually very well done, they look to say, what is the best tooling, whether it sits in my shop or not, and they try to embed that mindset into the other product owners that are trying to kind of work with a business around a business problem. That's very rare. Like, everybody tries to maximize their fiefdom, and you run into those challenges. But if you could adopt that mindset, what is the best tooling and set of capabilities to drive the outcome that we're looking for? Maybe
Yeah.
it is SAP, I haven't seen that a ton.
Quick question. As we're working with our sales teams and we're going after pursuits, how do we get our clients thinking more strategically, and how, as leaders with our sales folks, really get them asking the right questions so that when we do bring in Deloitte, it's not just, oh, we want to go do 2 or 3 automations in this area where we know we have a little bit of a problem, but looking at things more holistically, and then we say, we're going to align with Deloitte, and this is how we're going to help you tackle the overall challenge.
Did you plant them all, or?
That's a sales question. I'll hand
That
to you.
is. No. I mean, I think we are definitely going to get to that, so it's a great question. I think when we talk about, without stealing all of Gina's thunder, when we talk about process redesign, one of the things we're going to talk about is breaking down barriers across business functions. So when we're trying to solve a problem, whether it's order to cash, whether it's procure to pay, those touch multiple functional areas, right? That's rarely ever in one small business function. So what happens is, to your point, a sales executive or anyone goes into a shop and someone they're working with has a very discrete problem that they'd like an automation to solve or a few automations to solve. And the conversation focuses right there, and no one tests or questions, why are we solving this one problem in this one area? And what impact does that have upstream and downstream? We're going to talk about a way to think about changing, organizations' minds about how they think about the problem, kind of restate the problem they're trying to solve so they can actually think about solving it broader across an end-to-end process. And I think if, some of the ways we've had success with clients will open up the aperture for your sales executives to think about, so if I ask 2 more questions and I bring in 1 more group, we actually might be talking about solving a much larger problem, therefore more value for the organization. So I think it's just changing the mindset of the questions we ask and how we're thinking about what problem are we really trying to solve, upstream, downstream for the organization, versus, here's a soft toss, hit it, and then we'll all go away, right? So hopefully that helps.
It's interesting, again, question, go ahead.
I was wondering on the process monitoring. Is it process monitoring or over?
It's actually process monitoring, so your end-to-end process. So once you redesign a process, a lot of and we automate it, a lot of organizations don't look at, okay, now, did it have the impact that we had? So process intelligence tooling, like the tooling and automation anywhere, can kind of do that upfront piece, but also kind of let you do a health check to see if you've actually achieved the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And there are continuous monitoring capabilities too.
Yeah.
So is the process mining and process monitoring the same or?
Yeah, Gene, I think maybe we should define process intelligence and where those fit in. That might help.
So process intelligence is understanding how your processes work today. So using tools like Fortress IQ, perhaps coupled with Celonis in the marketplace to do that, to look at how what's actually happening in the organization and help inform with a data-based view what the impacts are of what you change. You can actually model changes in your process live in real time. So that's process intelligence. I think some folks don't like this terminology, but there's process mining, there's task mining. I won't get into the details. Process log files makes connection across your applications that produce log files and gives you a picture. Task mining kind of adds the layer of what don't I see from a log file to give you a true end-to-end picture of what's going on. Really powerful tooling, and I think automation has really driven the resurgence of that capability. I think we're going to see more of that, and we should see more of that, and it's a little bit about what we're talking about, to think more holistically about the process and end-to-end rather than what do I tweak.
Yeah. So I'd just add that I would say that Gina's explanation is perfect of process intelligence. We can mine, we can do task at like the user desktop level. Process monitoring kind of sits over it as the heartbeat of, okay, we did these things, we learned these things at a point in time. How do we monitor over time to make sure, like you said, where the changes are being implemented?
Okay, I think I skipped a slide to get to that one. Okay, yeah, we sort of made this point. The previous slide was around increased expectations in ROI and impact. Not surprisingly, the concept of end-to-end, people throw that term out so much. It can mean so many things. But I think at its most base definition, it means don't just look at a narrow slice. Look more broadly about how you can do multiple things or impact a broader scope. A lot of times, and automation actually, it enhances problems upstream and downstream, right? So if you can do something really fast in the middle of a process, then you see what's broken on either side oftentimes. And this is the concept of, well, maybe let's avoid that pain, and then let's look at that full spectrum. And so not surprisingly, those that have had some experience You know, those that are piloting, they don't have to do that, or they think they don't have to do that, because again, you're tripping over impactful automations that you can build without doing much, right? But as you grow and expand, you've got to look more broadly, and you've got to look end to end. And I think it, like I said, unearths some of the challenges in that process if you haven't looked end to end, because you sort of expose those warts. Excuse me. Okay. I don't know how to mute this mic. Sorry about the coughing. Okay. I didn't realize this was a build slide. So I'll unbuild the slide. So the concept today is disruptive design, and there are a lot of capabilities that are out there around process design, process reimagination, a lot of terminology for it. Let me just build the slide. Can I read this? That is a lot of, sorry.
I didn't do these animations. That was
Sarah
not
did.
my fault. Yeah.
Sarah did. She wanted to put a class on animation. I said no. So today we see a lot of incremental change. And what I want to stress, and we'll talk more about this, you don't have to do this for everything. It is okay to find your portfolio of very simple things to automate and get those taken care of. That is okay in some respects, right? This isn't for everything. So you should look for quick wins. You should look for things that you can tweak and optimize, but make good choices. The concept of transformational change is, where do I apply this in a really impactful area, a really important process? Where do I really need to drive different outcomes? And so thinking out of the box there is what that graphic means. Okay. All right. I should have had the design on this slide, or the definition. I think it's on the next slide. So this is sort of an homage to, so I started in Deloitte in the 90s, and I did process work, as every consultant did in the 90s. And I have a hat that says re-engineering for results, and I have literally a 3-inch binder that goes through all our methodologies and techniques to do that. That's all well and good. That's sort of still there. That's kind of the old thinking. Design thinking is thinking from the user experience in a really new way of looking at your business process end to end with the stakeholders in mind. And the concept of disruptive design, kind of thinking through this evolution, I'll see if I get the definition right. I think it's on the next slide. But this concept is saying, where we are now, we have disruptive capabilities that we didn't have when these processes first start. We can do things that people can't imagine, right, that are looking at a business process. And so I like to use the quote that is attributed to Henry Ford. I don't know if he actually said it or not, but he came up with the Model T, right? That was the first car. And he said, if I'd asked the people what they want, they would have said faster horses, right? This is about thinking not about how do I tweak the thing I have. It's about how do I get to the outcome, transportation, more quickly, that I'm trying to achieve, right? And that is the concept. And it's saying, I have capabilities today to get to that outcome that I didn't have when this process was conceived.
Yeah.
And so that's the concept.
And in the meantime, feeling free to question everything about why the process was designed that way to begin with. Like, for fear of repeating what Gina said, AI-enabled automation, RPA, process mining, these tool sets didn't exist. So for a process that was designed based on a human executing the process end to end, we now have been automating parts to replace the human. What we haven't done is we've ignored, why does the process exist that way to begin with, right? So for fear of repeating, just to really layer in there, thinking about the process should be designed to take advantage of the technology versus a human actually executing the process from start to finish.
That's another, again, would love your feedback. I'm sure everybody in the room's been through an ERP implementation, SAP, Oracle, what have you. I remember being a young process consultant and people saying, well, you need to design to the process, not to the technology. And then we'd be scratching our heads saying, well, the technology's got to do the process. That's true to a degree, right? But now I think, yes, you design to the process because of the technology, right? We should never have had that thinking about separating them, right? It's like, well, let's have a clean sheet of paper and the art of the possible on what we can do. It's like, no, it needs to fit within the technology. But now, this is a concept. Let's take the clean sheet of paper. Let's talk about our outcomes. Let's understand the capabilities we can bring to bear. That's actually the hard part and the novel part of this thought process is the art of the possible and what these technologies can do, and getting the people that actually know their business and what they're trying to achieve, educate them and immerse them on that topic, and then go be great.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm ex-SAP, so by a show of hands, how many people did a highly customized, process-driven SAP implementation and had a lot of success? Yeah.
pre-SAP for
You did?
HANA.
That's a lie. No, I'm
He's
kidding.
the only one. Had a lot of success. You fixed, yeah. Okay, it wasn't SAP's fault, by the
No,
way.
no. They told you if you just did it the way our system's built, you'll be
You'll
okay.
be fine, yeah. Then you have to hire 20 other people to do the rest of the stuff. Oh, there it is. It was on this slide. These darn builds. Let's see if I got it right. Yeah, I got it close enough. Good, so that's the concept. Okay. So disruptive design ingredients mashup. We don't have the time in a 45-minute session to go through the whole methodology and the framework of how actually you drive this. That's a much longer conversation. Let me just quickly see. Yeah, okay. So the concepts that go into this, radical transformation ambition. I flipped to the next slide because there's a point on there that is, this isn't for every process, right? It takes time. Radical transformation ambition. Let's think about what we're trying to get to, and let's, to a degree, drive a clean sheet. We should include all the data we talked about in the process today, the people, the FTE, et cetera, so we have that foundation to know if this makes sense to tackle, but let's focus on the outcome. This wouldn't be for your tactical, monthly close type stuff. This would be more for client-facing, customer-facing.
New business, commercial segmentation, all
Right.
that type of stuff. New go-to-market, yeah.
Can I ask a favor? I'm
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Go back to that previous slide with the definition for just one moment.
Sure.
Maybe, yeah, there we go.
That's it. Thank you, Colin.
Sure.
No problem.
Dumb build slides. There should be a button to take build out of all the slides. Okay, so we're.
We get the slides on the
I don't know if we're allowed to do that. Are we? We'll check on that. If
Perhaps.
we're allowed, we will.
May have to be a little bit of sanitation, but we can probably get you the concept slides, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking pictures, so close enough. Right?
Well, we have a setting on here where actually your phone is going to blow up in about 5 minutes.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's like vampires. Their
It is.
image doesn't appear on film. So we talked about this as well. Adaptive suite of disruptive technologies. That's super important in driving the what's new, what's different, what's transformational about this. Kind of learning about the one slide we had from our survey. That's not an exhaustive list of the capabilities. Vendors like Automation Anywhere are coming out, every quarter with some cool new way to do things differently. Like, to the extent that you can, derive understanding and awareness of that, of the people that own that business process, get their head wrapped around the art of the possible and drive that. Product orientation mindset. We're seeing so much more of this in IT for the reason that Joe mentioned is there's such varied tooling, and a lot of the tooling sits, for lack of a better word, in silos. And some of the silos may work together. But product orientation says, let's think about how to bring those capabilities together, bring the business user together, and think about how to seamlessly integrate the best capability to drive the desired outcome versus the somewhat historical approach of hammers looking for nails, right? And so that's that product orientation mindset. Then unbiased human-centered design. Again, could do a whole design session on that. That's an important component of disruptive design. Quickly, you can kind of see that this isn't, get in a room and throw up a process flow and then tweak stuff, right? It takes more time than that. I deleted all the tiny font on this slide because the concept of this slide is basically make choices about how you apply these different techniques. This should be for the very impactful, very significant, where transformation is really going to drive business. Business value is an overused term. What am I trying to say? Where it's actually going to drive the significant impact that warrants the investment in this technique and capability. So every good consulting firm has a 2x2, right? So business value transformation impact. That stuff in the far right may be aspirational. That's sort of like the flying car corner of the world. But in the no regret moves area, that's maybe like self-driving car type of thing, right? And that's sort of the parallel there. All right, any thoughts, any feedback on this? This isn't exactly tested over decades of deployment like most of the stuff that we do. Yeah.
You talk about the end-to-end process view, right? So how are these programs driven from business, from IT? What do you see from your experience? Right?
Good question.
That is such a loaded question.
But it's a good one.
It is an age-old question. I was talking to somebody at cocktails last night saying, there's always that divide between IT and business and that question of how you collaborate. And whatever the answer is, we always make a lot of money on trying to solve it. Consultants, so, yeah, I don't think that's going away. But So the technique, this is a tough one. So this technique, like Six Sigma is a component of this capability. If you have a process transformation sort of group that exists in your organization, that's fantastic. If you've got the tooling and the skills in your central IT function, that is a good place to own this capability and this concept. As we know, nothing happens without the people that understand the business and the business stakeholders, and those are the ones that should be driving the visionary outcomes. And those with those kind of suite of capabilities should be the one that's educating the business on what could be. So there's not a clear answer. It really depends on how your organization is structured. There's so much change now that we're seeing in large organizations and how they're structuring their IT and automation services, and thinking about how to integrate that process capability in. We served one client. This wasn't the best answer, but they had a continuous improvement function in their global business services, shared services. And then the automation technical capability sat with the IT group, and then the business basically drove the demand and the budget. And they had some sort of like Rube Goldberg machine defined where demand came through the global business services function, and they decided if they needed to transform it, and then they passed it off to the IT function, and it went back, and they did their design, and then went back to global business services and back to the. That's not the right way. That's not the right way. So some of the challenges that come into play based on how you're structured organizationally and where those capabilities sit, it's more about what are the skills that we need and where do they sit in my organization today. And if you're coming up with a blank slate, I think I'm still at the phase where I'm going to say there's no right answer in how you would set this up. I think it really is dependent on the culture of how you're structured today in your organization, federated, centralized, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I like your point, Gina, about if there's a CI group, a lot of organizations also have the role of like, BSRs or BSMs that are, business solution management, right? They sit within IT, but they're directly correlated and have respect of the functional business area, right? So a lot of times they can provide some of the glue between the IT business divide. But the other thing too, I would say, and we've seen clients be successful with, whether it's, this is not a shameless pitch for us or anyone else, but getting in a room and actually bringing IT and business together to do labs and to do design thinking workshops, I can't underscore the importance, not of what actually goes on the board from like customer journey mapping and everything else. It's about getting those people in a room together and realizing that both sides are human and you're both trying to solve the same problem. So can't underscore the importance of that, but trying to leverage, like Gina said, a CI group or your business success managers, business solution managers, if you have those that sit between IT and business, are probably your easiest paths.
As you see, new rules getting involved in organizations, I've got a chief automation officer, chief digital officer is coming in, right? So what importance they play in getting the IT and the business together? Because they always say, okay, this is my agenda from a transformation perspective. And I've seen a lot of companies coming with these new rules. So is that helping to solve a problem between the business and IT? Or are we still struggling with the people coming in? It's just the layers getting added, but the problem is still not solved.
Do you mind? I think the emergence of that role is really important, especially like the chief automation officer. I think we're going to see that obviously mature over time, which is an obvious statement. But where I've seen is that organizations at the CEO, COO level that have clearly defined, which not many have unless you've seen otherwise, clearly defined like automation transformation budgets, right, have clearly defined we as an organization are not going to go scrap around and try to pile up money. Like we have a budget for ERP transformation, we have a budget for HR transformation, we have a budget for automation transformation. Until that happens, I'm not trying to diminish the role of a CAO or a chief digital officer, but until that happens and the CEO and the COO and the CFO are driving a P&L driven agenda around automation, I think everything else is going to fall into place, right? Maybe not smoothly, but I don't know what your take is, but that's what I'm seeing is that the derivation from the board level to say, not just, because what happened 2 years ago? 2 years ago in the middle of the pandemic, someone's like, we need to figure out what this automation thing is, right? The CEO says, hey, you got a bot, I got a bot, like can we get some bots? And now we're coming out of the pandemic, they're trying to future-proof the hiring, right? Because we all had layoffs and now we're all saying, demand's coming back, but whoa, don't go hire 30% more people because COVID part 2 is around the corner. Not to scare anybody, it's not. It's actually killer bees, but or something. But anyway, but to future-proof that, now boards are saying, what is your digital worker automation strategy? And the more that happens, I think we'll see the emergence of that role playing a thing. But anyway.
I think regardless of where this sits, the lack of, we have slides around this too, the lack of an automation strategy hurts organizations. I think once you have the strategy in place, and that, again, another overused term, lack of strategy, but once you know what you're trying to accomplish and how you define automation, I'm actually working with a client tomorrow in a greenhouse lab to do this very thing. What's your intelligent automation overall strategy, and what's your path to get there? Until you have that strategy, you define what it means for your organization, I don't think you're gonna know how to structure it. Like a client that we work with, it's actually public data, so I can say it, they have a $500 million savings target enabled through intelligent automation. That actually caused real change in the organization, real collaboration, real focus on this capability. Because it was part of their strategy and they thought that this was important. So.
And they were gold and measured on the outcome.
And
right?
they are measured. It also causes some silly behavior, but we get
Everything
that's automation.
Everything becomes automation.
That's
point.
automation. Yeah. Okay, maybe not, but.
I'm sorry,
No,
just
go
to
ahead.
follow up on that.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I speak to my clients, they tell me that the business has got all the budget and the savings, right? And IT doesn't have. So, whenever we go ask for funding, so IT says, sorry, we don't have funding. And when we ask the business, saying, sorry, we don't have funding. But, but the overall automation savings is for the business. They get all the benefits, right? So then where is the strategy of having a budget for automation? Because one of the areas where I'm struggling is when I speak to my clients saying, sorry, we don't have budget, right? But they still want to see benefits of automation coming out. And, every time when we attend these seminars, we, get all these guys, in a meeting room, we want to automate as much as possible. But when it comes to funding, everybody's quiet.
Yeah, I think you can look at that in a number of ways, right? Like if the program, it's a virtuous circle, right? If the program drives value, people are going to want more of it. I am a strong believer. This is one of the areas where I used to say, how you manage budget here depends. I truly and strongly believe that the core and basic costs for a program, licensing, infrastructure, a small core group of technical resources to keep it running and monitoring it, I strongly believe that should be part of an overhead allocation like any other part of a technology infrastructure. From a everything else standpoint, this stuff should stand on its own. You should be able to drive business benefit and business impact that has an ROI that justifies investing in it. And that, in my wholehearted opinion, should come from the business. We've seen both directions where this is funded fully and it's subsidized by corporate and then everybody can just consume it. That sounds like a good idea, and at first it is, but then you get people, anytime you give something away for free, you get people that, yeah, I want 5 of these, and then they don't show up to the design sessions, and then they don't show up to testing, and they can't provide you test data. And so there's got to be that sort of balance of incentive and motivation. I mean, as a service provider, so obviously we do this, we'll invest. We'll say, pay us based on your outcomes. And a concept like that, if you get that underwritten by your corporate, we get it underwritten by our leadership, right? If you can get that underwritten, if you believe in the capability, then that's what you should do, right? And I think where these programs have taken hold, that's less of a problem. Now, the budget cycle is an issue. What's our forecast and budget relative to this, and how do we? That does come into play like anything else. But again, offer it self-funded. There you go.
Yeah. No.
Thoughts?
Yeah, well said.
All right, we only have 6 minutes left. I don't know what else. Was there? Okay. Yes.
When you talk about disruptive design, I mean, it's not IT which is getting disrupted. I think it's the business or the business processes which is getting disrupted. So I assume that would mean there would be an executive sponsor from the business to drive that organizational change for that disruptive design.
There has to the passion has to be owned by the business. I think the capability could sit wherever, but the passion has to come from the business.
So how do we trigger that passion within the business for those kind of a disruptive? Is it something which is to be internal, or is it something just to come from an activist investor or some from the share?
My suggestion based on what we've seen is that if you can align to, let's say it's a specific corporate function, right? So if it's procurement, and you know that the major milestones they're going to be measured on this year are, I'm making these up, but like reducing the number of vendors or whatever their milestones are in procurement, if you come to them with an approach of how they could reimagine and rethink about how they solved that problem, not with, I have a new tool to show you, I'm not picking on anyone, I'm just saying, not with I have a new tool to show you, not with how do we support your RFI, RFQ, RFX activities. If you come to them and say, we know, Mr. and Mrs. Chief Procurement Officer in your team, you're measured on driving these 3 things, can we sit with you and help you think a different way about how we can help you solve those problems? Keep tech out of the conversation, keep existing, like Gina said before, blank slate type of approach. I think if you take that approach, because what they're all trying to do, having worked in business functions, both of us, they're trying to solve these business problems. And they honestly don't care if the solution is, no offense, automation anywhere, RPA, or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. They just want to solve the problem. So if you take the approach of we're here to help you think about a different way to solve the problem, I think you might get some, collaboration and cooperation, as opposed to the typical approach, which comes with it preset expectations of how they want to interact with IT and barriers that go up and things like that.
An internal IT person needs to take off his IT hat somewhere else, go into the business as a business consultant, and then engage the chief procurement officer or anybody else as sort of a business consultant to help look at and arrive at solutions.
I love that analogy. Yeah, if they could take off their IT hat for a day or two and go in and say, how can I help you think better about your business problem? And again, that's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of folks in IT.
Yeah, not only that, and I think IT people need to be trained to play that role. Some of us are not even trained to play that role. That's
Absolutely.
kind of investment which the CIOs needs to do within that IT team.
I fully agree with that. That is true. Yep. Yeah, no problem. Good question.
Okay, we have 3.5 minutes left, and they said there's going to be a big hook that takes us off stage.
There's actually a trap door in the floor.
We fall through it. So
you won't see a cool demo today, but that's okay.
you won't see the cool demo. Talk to Joe later for the cool demo. I think we've kind of covered most of these concepts. Radical transformation. So foundational aspects required to drive a program like this. You have to believe that there's the ability to radically transform. Elon Musk said we can live in space, right? That's sort of the far end of that radical transformation ambition. Data informs all decisions. We talked about process intelligence and process mining. Though we're not trying to tweak the current state, knowledge of the current state is super helpful. Human-centered design, thinking about how this works from a user standpoint, super important. Choose your most important stakeholder and design to that stakeholder. We talked a lot about the product orientation mindset. And then the suite of disruptive technologies, which is ever changing, and that is, you asked the question earlier, who should own this? I do believe that evangelists in IT that stay at the edge of this type of stuff and can create really cool pictures of what's possible with this tech is foundational to the ability to do this, because that's what's different about this and all the other stuff I've been doing for my 30 years of consulting. All right, I think that's it. We had a demo, but we don't have enough time to do that. So any parting thoughts or questions?
Yeah.
All right, so great presentation. Just thinking about disruptive design, would you recommend that for startups or for relatively young companies? Because I think when you have older companies, then you have processes that have been going in the same way, then you might need to go back, look, assess, improve, and whatnot, right? But if the organization is constantly changing, would you still vouch for disruptive design?
Well, I mean, my thought is, it's a great question. My thought is, it's certainly going to be easier in the startup mentality, right? It's going to be easier to foster that type of mindset because the whole kind of je ne sais quoi of a startup is how do we disrupt ourselves and how do we be a lean startup and how do we try something pivot. So it might be easier to bring this concept to a startup. However, what I will say is that my experience is at a bigger, more mature company, the opportunity and the value that can be driven if you can crack that code is much larger, usually, right? Because a startup is still figuring out where they're going to get their revenue from and they're running at a negative margin and all those type of things. So it's harder, but if you embed this type of disruptive design thinking, and you get the right change agent within a functional area, within a larger organization, that one functional area could drive 8-9 figures of value for the organization with this approach. Whereas at a startup or a smaller company that's just getting off the ground, this actually is going to be critical to their success in general. I just don't know if they'll see a big transformational shift in savings or value. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I'll say things I don't normally say as a consultant, that we shouldn't use the thing that we built and sell to clients for a startup. But I think startups, you might not need this, right? If I think of things that we've started in the past, you natively do this, right?
Yeah.
You are thinking this way as you define that stuff. It's the stuff where there's legacy, technical debt, where there's legacy thinking, where this is really impactful. So I think you would probably come out of the gate doing this. When we started the automation practice from a bunch of other practices, Frankenstein, 7 or 8 years ago, everything we built to drive the practice was state of the art. And I remember our internal cost transformation was coming around saying, you got to do all these 15 things. It's like, we already did that because we're a new practice, right? I think you would just do this natively. Anything else? 1 second.
Oh.
Well, thank you very much.